No names. No places. No explanations. The house is quiet in a way that feels wrong. A body lies on the living room floor, face down, unmoving. One hand is curled near the mouth as if it reached for air and never found it. The other is pressed against the stomach, 8 months pregnant, where something has already gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. Beside her, a dog refuses to move. Not whimpering, not hiding, guarding. Every few seconds, a low sound crawls out of his chest. Not a bark, not a growl meant to warn strangers away. Something older, something territorial, something protective. The sound of an animal that understands loss but doesn't understand why it happened. Hours pass. No one comes. The dog stays. When the front door finally opens, the sound breaks him. He jumps to his feet, shaking so hard his nails scrape the floor. He circles the body once, twice, then stops and stares at the person standing in the doorway. His fur rises along his spine. His lips pull back. The sound changes. This is not grief. This is recognition. Because this dog, gentle, obedient, never aggressive, will spend the next several days doing something that makes no sense. He will remain calm around police officers, calm around paramedics, calm around friends, neighbors, strangers. But every single time one specific person enters the room, he will lose control. Not randomly, not inconsistently, only her. And that reaction, animal, instinctive, impossible to train or reason away, will force detectives to confront a question they don't want to ask. What if the most honest witness to this crime isn't human at all? What if the dog knows exactly who did this? Pause. Before we go any further, welcome back. If you're listening from somewhere far away, tell us where you're watching from. If stories like this matter to you, share it. And stay with us, because what you're about to hear isn't just about violence. It's about control, obsession, and the moment a boundary becomes a trigger. Now listen carefully. The woman on the floor didn't die instantly. Medical evidence will later show that the injury that knocked her down, violent, sudden, might not have been fatal on its own. There was a window. Minutes where calling for help could have saved her, could have saved the baby. Instead, someone watched her struggle to breathe. Someone saw her reach. Someone made a decision. A pillow, soft, decorative, chosen for comfort, was pressed over her face. Hard enough to cut off air. Long enough to make survival impossible. 90 seconds is all it takes to turn panic into silence. 90 seconds to end 2 lives that were supposed to begin together. The baby never takes a breath. The room holds onto everything. The displaced furniture, the broken edge of a table, the faint traces of blood diluted in a kitchen sink. Even after someone tries to clean it, tries to erase it, the house remembers. So does the dog. He was there for all of it. He heard the voices rise. He heard something fall. He smelled fear, panic, and a scent he had known before, but never like this. And now that scent means danger. When investigators arrive later that night, they will notice him immediately. The way he positions himself between the body and anyone who steps too close. The way his eyes track movement. The way he refuses to calm down when one person walks past him. They will write it down as a detail. At first, because in homicide investigations, details either fade or they harden into evidence. This one hardens. Over the next 72 hours, a pattern emerges. A pattern so specific it can't be explained away by trauma alone. A pattern that follows a single individual from room to room, from house to police station, from freedom to arrest. And when detectives finally put all the pieces together, witness statements, phone data, forensic traces, and the animal who never stopped remembering, they realize something unsettling. The truth was never hidden. It was growling the entire time. And the most disturbing part? The dog wasn't trying to attack. He was trying to protect the only family he had left from the person who took the rest away. Hold that thought. Because to understand why this happened, why control turned lethal, and why no one saw it coming until it was far too late, you have to go back. Back to a life that looked safe. Back to a family that believed love was loyalty. Back to a relationship where one person refused to let go. And to the moment when a boundary was set. and someone decided they would rather destroy everything than lose control. The front door opens, and the quiet breaks. Not with footsteps, not with voices, with a sound that doesn't belong in a calm house. Keys hit the floor. A man stands frozen in the doorway, staring at something his brain refuses to process. The dog is shaking now, pacing in tight circles, nails clicking, breathing fast. The smell in the room has changed, metallic, sour, wrong. On the living room floor, a body lies face down. 8 months pregnant. Still, for a moment, he thinks she fainted, that she slipped, that this is something explainable, reversible, ordinary. He calls her name once, then louder. Then he's on his knees, hands on her shoulders, trying to turn her over. She's cold. Not hospital cold. Not air-conditioned cold. The kind of cold that means time has already won. He screams. It doesn't sound human. It sounds like something tearing loose inside a chest. The dog starts barking, sharp, frantic, then stops abruptly, positioning himself between the body and the hallway, as if expecting someone else to come through the door. The man fumbles for his phone, drops it, picks it up, dials emergency services with fingers that won't stop shaking. Words come out broken, out of order. Wife, pregnant, not breathing. Please. The operator asks for an address, asks him to check for a pulse, asks him to begin CPR. He can't, because the moment he touches her wrist, he knows. This isn't rescue. This is aftermath. Sirens arrive minutes later. Red and blue lights cut across the quiet street. Neighbors step onto porches, some in slippers, some holding phones, all of them watching a private disaster spill into public space. Paramedics enter first. They don't rush. That's the detail that will haunt him later. They kneel. They check. They exchange a look that doesn't need words. One of them gently shakes his head. Time of death is called. The baby is gone too. Upstairs, a nursery waits. Yellow walls. A crib assembled by hand. Tiny clothes folded carefully into drawers. A hospital bag by the door, packed and ready. Downstairs, a future ends on the living room floor. Police arrive next. They scan the house quickly. No broken windows. No kicked-in doors. No signs of forced entry. Everything is where it should be. TV on the wall, purse on the table, keys in their place. Nothing stolen, which means whoever did this wasn't a stranger. The dog won't let anyone near the body. He growls when an officer steps too close. Snaps when a paramedic tries to pass. Eventually, animal control is called. Even as they lead him away, he strains against the leash, eyes locked on the room he's being pulled from, as if leaving her feels wrong, as if danger hasn't passed. Outside, the man sits on the steps, head in his hands, repeating the same sentence over and over. I should have been here. Detectives listen. They always do. Because in cases like this, the person who finds the body is never just a witness. Statistics demand questions. Intimate partners are often responsible. Pregnancy increases risk. Grief can look like guilt if you're not careful. So they ask, when did you last see her? That morning. Any arguments? No. Anyone who might want to hurt her? The question lands wrong. He looks up, confused, almost offended by the idea. Everyone loved her. She was kind. She didn't fight with people. She didn't have enemies. But detectives don't work on impressions. They work on timelines. And the timeline matters. He left the house mid-morning. His work records confirm it. Coworkers confirm it. Phone data confirms it. He never came back until evening. The window of death opens wide. Autopsy results arrive the next day. They are precise, unemotional, final. Cause of death, asphyxiation. Not a fall, not an accident. Someone cut off her air supply. There is blunt force trauma to the abdomen, consistent with a heart impact. But the medical examiner is clear. That injury alone might not have killed her. With immediate medical intervention, survival was possible, which means something else happened after the fall. Something intentional. Defensive injuries are documented. Scratches, bruising, signs of a struggle. She fought back. She was conscious. She was trying to survive. Her baby was viable, healthy, weeks away from birth. That matters too. This wasn't fate. This was a decision. Investigators return to the house. They photograph everything, measure distances, collect items most people would overlook. A decorative pillow, a broken piece of furniture found in the trash, fibers that don't belong where they are. And then there's the dog. At first, his behavior is written off as trauma. Animals grieve. Animals react. Animals get confused when routines shatter. But something feels specific. He's calm around officers, calm around technicians, calm around neighbors who stop by in shock. He allows strangers to pet him, allows himself to be led, fed, touched, until one person enters the house. The reaction is immediate, not gradual, not uncertain, instant. His body stiffens, fur rises, teeth show. The sound in his chest turns low and dangerous. He places himself between that person and the man sitting on the couch, trembling. It happens again the next day. Same person, same response. No one else triggers it. Not the chaos, not the uniforms, not the strangers, just her. At first, the man dismisses it, says the dog is confused, traumatized, looking for someone to blame because animals don't understand death. But detectives notice patterns. They always do. And patterns don't care about explanations. The dog reacts the same way every time, with the same intensity, the same focus, the same refusal to calm down. Not fear, protection. That's when one of the detectives writes a note in her case file. Behavior appears targeted. It's a small sentence, easy to miss, easy to dismiss, but it changes everything. Because if the house shows no forced entry, if nothing was stolen, if the victim fought someone she knew, then the most dangerous person in the room was never a stranger. And the only witness who can't lie, can't manipulate, can't forget, is the one still barking. Before the night is over, detectives narrow their focus. They begin looking not outward, but inward, at relationships, at tensions, at the kind of conflict that doesn't show up in public but corrodes slowly, quietly, over years. They start asking a new question. Who would she open the door for? Without hesitation? And as that question takes shape, the dog reacts again. Harder this time. Louder. As if he understands something the humans are only just beginning to see. Because whatever happened in that living room didn't come out of nowhere. It was built. Patiently. Emotionally. Over time. And the person responsible didn't arrive angry. They arrived believing they were entitled. That's where this really begins. And to see it clearly, you have to rewind. To before the pregnancy. Before the house. Before the warning signs were impossible to ignore. Back to the foundation. Back to the first moment control was mistaken for love. And once you see that, there's no unseeing it. Investigators don't announce it when a case shifts. There's no moment where someone says this is it. No dramatic turn. No raised voices. Just a subtle change in posture. Fewer questions about strangers. More questions about relationships. Because once forced entry is ruled out, once robbery is dismissed, the circle tightens on its own. The victim didn't panic when the door opened. She didn't run. She didn't call for help. She let someone in. That single fact narrows the world dramatically. Detectives begin doing what they always do next, talking to the people who knew her best. Not just what they saw, but what they felt. What she complained about. What she laughed off. What she didn't want to make a big deal out of. They start with family. Her mother describes a daughter who was excited, nervous, glowing in that exhausted, hopeful way late pregnancy brings. A woman counting days, folding baby clothes over and over, just to feel real. No signs of fear, no talk of danger. Her sisters echo the same thing. She was tired, sure, emotional sometimes, but happy, stable, focused on the future. Friends say she was careful, not naive. She trusted people, but not blindly. She didn't invite chaos into her life. So detectives asked the uncomfortable follow-up. Was there anyone who didn't like her? The room goes quiet. Because that question changes things. At first, no one answers. Not because there's no answer, but because saying it out loud feels disloyal. Like gossiping after someone is already gone. Like making something ugly when the focus should be on grief. Then someone exhales and says it. There was tension. Not new. Not explosive. Slow. Persistent. Wearing. A relationship that never softened, no matter how much time passed. It's described carefully at first. Passive comments. Subtle undermining. Moments that made her feel small but were easy to dismiss in public. The kind of behavior that's invisible unless you're the one living inside it. Detectives lean in, not physically, but mentally. Because this is how patterns announce themselves. They learned there had been years of friction. Smiles that didn't reach eyes. Conversations that felt like tests. Moments where affection turned conditional. They learned that in the weeks before her death, boundaries had finally been drawn. Firm ones. And boundaries, when set too late, can feel like betrayal to the wrong person. The detectives don't jump to conclusions. They never do. They need corroboration. They need timelines. They need proof that emotion crossed into motive. So they widen the lens. They ask about the pregnancy announcement. The reaction wasn't joyful. Not excited. Not proud. Muted. Cold. Almost disappointed. They ask about the baby. There were comments. Small ones. About ownership. About rights. About who mattered most. They ask about the hospital plan. And that's when the tone changes completely. Because this wasn't just a disagreement. This was a decision. The victim had decided that someone would not be present at the birth. Not in the room. Not in the waiting area. Not at all. To her, it was about peace. Safety. Reducing stress in the most vulnerable moment of her life. To someone else, it sounded like exile. Detectives look at each other. Because timing matters. And that boundary wasn't theoretical. It was communicated clearly. Directly. Days before the murder. Which reframes everything. The visit that day, it wasn't random. It wasn't casual. It wasn't checking in. It was a confrontation. Now detectives return to the timeline of the murder with fresh eyes. Midday arrival. Hours inside the house. Departure before the husband returns. Plenty of time. Plenty of privacy. And suddenly, a new detail takes on weight. A neighbor across the street had seen a familiar car pull into the driveway that afternoon. Not unusual on its own, but notable in hindsight. She remembers the color. The way it parked. The way the visit lasted longer than expected. She remembers raised voices. Not playful. Not heated discussion. Angry. Then a loud noise. Something heavy hitting the floor. Then nothing. Silence thick enough to feel wrong. She had considered calling for help. She didn't. People argue. Families fight. It didn't seem like her place. That decision will follow her for the rest of her life. Detectives now have something solid. Presence. Opportunity. And a reason no one wants to say out loud yet. They invite the person in question to come talk. Voluntarily. Just to help clear things up. The response is immediate. Agreeable. Cooperative. Almost eager. Which raises a quiet internal flag. People who are innocent are sometimes hesitant, but rarely rehearsed. They're confused. Defensive. Emotional. This cooperation feels controlled. The interview begins simply. Where were you that afternoon? The answer comes quickly. Too quickly. At work. All day. Detectives nod. Write it down. Thank her. Then they verify. Because truth doesn't mind being checked. Work records tell a different story. She left for errands. Didn't return for hours. No receipts. No clear explanation. Just time unaccounted for. Detectives bring her back in. Ask again. The answer changes. Now she remembers errands. Groceries. Banking. Vague locations. Fuzzy timing. Memory shouldn't degrade this fast. Especially not when the day in question involves the violent death of your pregnant daughter-in-law. They press gently. Which store? What time? She can't say. Meanwhile, another team knocks on doors again. This time, with photographs. When the neighbor sees the lineup, she doesn't hesitate. Points immediately. That's her. The car. The timing. The visit. Now the case tightens like a fist. Detectives confront her with the contradiction. Her composure cracks, but only briefly. She recovers fast. Explains it away. Says she stopped by briefly. 20 minutes. No argument. Everything was fine when she left. But the evidence doesn't agree. Neither does the medical examiner. And neither does the dog. Because when detectives return to the house with her present, just to observe, something happens that can't be ignored. The dog, come moments earlier, transforms again. Same reaction, same intensity, same focus. Not fear of uniforms, not anxiety about strangers, just her. One detective watches it happen in real time, writes it down again, more firmly this time. Response is consistent and specific. That night, she makes a call. The next morning, detectives discover she's begun withdrawing cash. Large amounts. Quietly. Quickly. Another quiet shift happens inside the investigation. This is no longer about if something happened. It's about how far it went, and whether what began as control ended as something much darker. Before they can charge her, they need the full story. And to get that, they have to understand the past, not just the crime scene. They need to know how love became leverage, how sacrifice turned into entitlement, how one relationship was allowed to eclipse all others. So they go back to the beginning, to a mother who raised a son alone, to a bond that never loosened, to a pattern that repeated itself quietly until it couldn't anymore. And as that history unfolds, one question lingers, unsettling and unavoidable. When does devotion stop being love and start being possession? That answer is buried years before the murder, and uncovering it will make what happens next impossible to look away from. Long before anyone lay on a living room floor, before police tape, before interviews, before a dog learned a scent he would never forget, there was a bond that formed in absence. It began with abandonment. A young woman, newly married, learning very quickly that promises don't always survive real life. The man she married left when their child was still small. No slow fade, no long explanation, just a packed bag, a closed door, and silence where partnership was supposed to be. From that moment on, survival became identity. She worked longer hours, took fewer breaks, measured love and sacrifices made and hardships endured. Every mile driven, every bill paid, every meal prepared alone became proof of devotion. And at the center of it all was her son. He became purpose, not just someone she loved, but someone she needed. Someone whose presence confirmed she hadn't lost everything. Someone whose loyalty would make the abandonment hurt less, if only indirectly. She told him often, "It's just you and me." At first, it sounded comforting. Later, it became doctrine. As he grew older, the boundaries between guidance and control blurred. Decisions were shared, but only if they aligned with what she believed was best. Friends were tolerated. Girlfriends were evaluated. Futures were filtered through her approval. And if something or someone threatened that bond, the threat wasn't addressed openly. It was eroded quietly. Relationships didn't end in dramatic fights. They dissolved slowly under pressure. Subtle comments, persistent doubt, guilt disguised as concern. "You can do better. You're rushing. She's not right for you." Each time, he listened. Not because he didn't care about the women he dated, but because defying his mother felt like betrayal, like ingratitude, like erasing everything she'd given up for him. This pattern repeated, again and again, until one day it didn't. Because then he met someone who didn't compete for control. She didn't demand. She didn't isolate. She didn't pull him away forcefully. She simply built a life beside him. That was the difference. She encouraged independence without framing it as abandonment. She invited connection without erasing family. She didn't position herself as more important, just present. And for the first time, he chose not to retreat. At first, his mother believed it would pass. They always did. But months turned into years. The relationship didn't fracture under scrutiny. It strengthened. Boundaries formed naturally. Time shifted. Weekends were no longer automatic. Phone calls shortened. Decisions were made without consultation. And something changed. Not outwardly. Not explosively. Internally. Because control, once established, doesn't disappear quietly. It resists. It tightens. It reframes itself as concern when challenged. When she was introduced, the reception was polite, but cold. No warmth. No curiosity. Just assessment. Measurement. The tension wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It lived in pauses. In silences. In the way conversations were redirected to exclude her. In how affection was withheld, not denied, just rationed. The new woman noticed it immediately. She described it later as feeling like she'd walked into a room where something precious had already been claimed, and she was standing too close to it. She tried anyway. She extended kindness, made space, showed respect, believed time would soften what distance couldn't. But control doesn't soften. It adapts. As the relationship deepened, objections became more pointed. Not insults, but narratives. She's changing you. You're not yourself anymore. You're forgetting where you came from. The implication was clear. Love had conditions, and those conditions were being violated. When engagement entered the conversation, resistance hardened. Concern gave way to certainty. Silence replaced discussion. Attendance at milestones became optional. Support became performative. Still, the relationship moved forward. Marriage followed. Not a dramatic rupture, but a quiet realignment of priorities. And that's when the pressure intensified. Phone calls increased. Drop-ins became unannounced. Opinions became directives. Critiques disguised themselves as advice. The home they built together, small, imperfect, theirs, became another battleground. The walls were wrong. The colors were wrong. The way things were arranged was wrong. Nothing was neutral. Every visit carried evaluation, and every evaluation carried an unspoken message. This is not how it should be. When the pregnancy was announced, something brittle formed beneath the surface. This wasn't just another woman. This was permanence. A child meant hierarchy. It meant shift. It meant a new center of gravity that could never be reclaimed. The reaction wasn't anger. It was rejection masked as indifference. Later, it became intrusion. Unsolicited purchases. Claimed rights. Statements about my grandchild, spoken not with joy, but ownership. The mother-to-be tried to keep peace. Excused comments. Absorbed discomfort. Told herself stress was temporary. But stress compounds. And late pregnancy strips patience. By the final weeks, the atmosphere had changed completely. What once felt like tension now felt like threat. Not physical, but emotional. She felt watched, judged, undermined. And finally, she said enough. The decision to set boundaries wasn't impulsive. It was measured, considered, necessary. No hospital presence. No waiting room. No hovering during the most vulnerable moment of her life. It was communicated clearly, respectfully, firmly. And on the other end of the phone, something broke. Not audibly, not immediately, but internally. Because to someone who equates sacrifice with ownership, boundaries don't sound like protection. They sound like erasure. They sound like replacement. They sound like exile. That call wasn't an argument. It was a verdict. And in the days that followed, silence replaced confrontation. No calls. No messages. No apology. From the outside, it looked like acceptance. From the inside, it was calculation. Because the foundation had already been laid. Years of entitlement. Years of emotional leverage. Years of identity tied to one relationship. And when that relationship was finally threatened with permanence, with a child, a marriage, a future that didn't revolve around her, something had to give. The question wasn't whether conflict would come. It was when, and how far it would go. Because when control is mistaken for love, losing it doesn't feel like disappointment. It feels like annihilation. And that is the soil this crime grew from. Still unseen. Still ignored. Still underestimated. But already dangerous. And the moment it finally surfaced, there would be no turning back. Control doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly, disguised as stability, as responsibility, as the steady hand that keeps everything from falling apart. And for years, it worked. The mother had always been the constant. The one who showed up. The one who sacrificed. The one whose opinion carried weight because it was earned through hardship. So when the relationship survived her disapproval, when the marriage went forward without her blessing, when a home was built without her input, she adjusted her strategy, not by withdrawing, by inserting herself deeper. Phone calls became routine again, then frequent. Morning check-ins, evening follow-ups, questions framed as concern but delivered like audits. Did you eat? Did she cook? Are you sure that's a good use of money? They sounded harmless. But repetition turns questions into pressure. Visits followed. Not planned. Not requested. Always justified. I was in the neighborhood. Inside the house, she moved like someone assessing territory, opening cabinets, commenting on decor, rearranging small things as if correcting mistakes. Each action was minor on its own. Together, they sent a message. This space is still negotiable. The wife noticed. She felt it in her shoulders, in the way her body tensed when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. She tried to laugh it off, tried to be gracious, tried to avoid confrontation. But pregnancy sharpened everything. Fatigue lowered tolerance. Hormones stripped away politeness. The future stopped feeling abstract and started feeling immediate. This wasn't just about discomfort anymore. This was about safety. And the baby, still unseen, still protected inside her, became a focal point. She noticed the language shift. Not your child. Not our grandchild. My baby. The words landed wrong every time. When she gently pushed back, the response wasn't apology. It was offense. As if boundaries were insults. As if gratitude was owed in exchange for restraint. Then came escalation. Suggestions turned into directives. Opinions into warnings. Open a separate bank account. Protect yourself. You never know how things will turn out. The implication was unmistakable. This marriage was temporary. This woman was replaceable. This future was fragile. And the husband, caught between loyalty and love, started seeing the cost of neutrality. Defending his wife triggered guilt. Remaining silent felt like betrayal. He tried to balance. He failed. Because balance only works when both sides respect it. The pregnancy accelerated everything. As the due date approached, the mother became more present, not less. Her visits lengthened. Her tone sharpened. Her patience thinned. At a family gathering, a comment was made about appearance, about whether pregnancy was showing yet. It wasn't concern. It was dismissal. The room went quiet. No one challenged it directly. And silence, again, did the work. Another time, gifts arrived unannounced. Baby clothes, blankets, items chosen without consultation, stacked without permission. When the wife expressed appreciation, but also said they already had plenty, the reaction was immediate. Defensive, territorial. I'm the grandmother. Not we. Not we'll decide together. Just I. The husband intervened. Asked for space. Tried to slow things down. The response was cold. Warnings replaced warmth. You're going to regret this. Then came the phone call. The one that stripped away all ambiguity. The mother called the wife directly, alone. No buffer. No witness. The conversation started calmly. Casual. Almost kind. Then the question was dropped. Are you sure he even wants this baby? It was said softly, not as accusation, as doubt. The wife ended the call shaking. Not because of what was said, but because of what it implied. That her pregnancy was leverage. That her marriage was negotiable. That her place in the family was conditional. That night, she told her husband everything. For the first time, he didn't excuse it. He didn't rationalize. He saw it. And that's when the ascent reached its peak. Because when he called his mother to set boundaries, real ones, the illusion shattered. No hospital access. No interference. No more disrespect. He said it clearly. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. Her voice went flat. You're choosing her over me. He responded without hesitation. I'm choosing my family. The word family mattered. It drew a line. And lines, once drawn, don't disappear just because someone refuses to see them. The call ended without resolution, without reconciliation. Silence followed. From the outside, it looked like withdrawal. From the inside, it was escalation without witnesses. In the days that followed, the mother didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up. The house grew quieter. The wife believed, briefly, that it was over, that the boundary had worked, that peace had finally arrived. She focused on the baby, on the last appointment, on the countdown. 3 weeks. Everything was ready. What she didn't know was that silence wasn't acceptance. It was planning. Because when control is challenged publicly, it often retreats privately to reassess, recalibrate, and reassert itself in another form. And in that recalibration, something hardened. The mother wasn't losing her son. She was being replaced. By a woman. By a child. by a future she didn't command. That belief, true or not, became justification. Justification for showing up uninvited. Justification for confrontation. Justification for reclaiming what she believed was hers. The visit that followed wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. She chose the day carefully, chose the time precisely, chose the moment when the house would be quiet and unguarded. The husband would be gone. The wife would be alone. The baby still inside her. And when the door opened, it wouldn't feel like danger. It would feel familiar, trusted, safe. That was the final miscalculation. Because when entitlement meets resistance, when control meets defiance, the result isn't compromise. It's collision. And the impact was already on its way. The visit didn't announce itself as a threat. There was no raised voice at the door, no visible anger, no sense of urgency. Just a familiar figure standing on the porch in the middle of the day, framed by a quiet neighborhood and a house that had always opened willingly before. The wife hesitated just for a second, not because she was afraid, because she was tired. Late pregnancy had narrowed her world to small tasks and slower movements. She was alone, but not anxious. This was family. Complicated, difficult family, but not dangerous. So she opened the door. From the outside, nothing looked different. But pressure doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips inside politely and waits for the moment when resistance feels like too much effort. The conversation began exactly where it always had. Concern masquerading as care. Observations framed as help. How are you feeling? You look exhausted. Pregnancy is hard on marriages, you know. The wife listened without responding. She had learned that engaging only extended the exchange. Silence, she hoped, would shorten it. It didn't. The pressure increased subtly. Comments turned more pointed. Tone sharpened. The room grew smaller. The hospital plan was mentioned, not as a question, as a grievance. The mother spoke about rights, about exclusion, about being pushed aside after everything she had done. The wife stood near the couch, one hand resting instinctively on her stomach. Her posture wasn't defensive, but protective. She repeated the boundary calmly. The decision had been made. It wasn't personal. It was about peace. The response was immediate. Dismissive. You don't get to decide that. The words landed heavy. Because they weren't about the hospital. They were about authority. The wife corrected her. Yes, she did get to decide. This was her body. Her birth. Her child. That was the moment the pressure became visible. Voices rose. Not to screaming, but sharp enough to cut. Accusations surfaced. Old resentments bled through. Years of unspoken conflict condensed into minutes. The mother accused her of manipulation, of stealing, of poisoning the relationship. The wife told her to leave. Not angrily, firmly. The room went still. That request, simple, reasonable, hit harder than any insult. Because it meant the confrontation had failed. The control hadn't been restored. The wife moved toward the door. Whether to open it for her, or to create space, is impossible to know. What is known is that the mother followed. Fast. Hands reached out. Contact was made. The shove wasn't planned. It wasn't calculated. But it was decisive. The wife's balance shifted instantly. 8 months pregnant. Her center of gravity already altered. She stumbled backward, hips colliding with the sharp edge of the coffee table. The sound was unmistakable. Wood against bone. She went down hard. Face first. For a fraction of a second, everything stopped. The room. The argument. The narrative. Then pain arrived. Severe. Blinding. Radiating from her abdomen outward. Her breath caught. Her body curled instinctively around the baby. The fall alone might not have killed her. Medical experts would later confirm that. There was still time. Minutes mattered. She was conscious. Struggling. Trying to inhale fully and failing. One hand scraped against the floor as she reached, toward the couch, toward her phone, toward help. The mother saw all of it. Saw the panic. Saw the effort. Saw the reality forming in front of her. And in that moment, she faced a choice. Call for help and explain what happened. Or try to undo the consequences herself. Pressure does something dangerous to people who believe they are entitled to outcomes. It collapses morality into self-preservation. The mother panicked. Not with chaos. With calculation. She looked at the door, the windows, the room, the body on the floor. She saw her future unraveling. And she made a decision. She grabbed a throw pillow from the couch. Soft, decorative, familiar. She pressed it over the wife's face. At first, it wasn't forceful. More hesitation than intent. But the wife fought. Hard. Scratched. Kicked. Thrashed. Her nails dug into skin. Left marks that would later tell their own story. Her body convulsed as oxygen disappeared. Her legs weakened. Her movements slowed. The pressure increased. The pillow didn't move. 90 seconds. That's all it takes. When it was over, the room was silent again. But this time, it wasn't a pause. It was an ending. The baby, deprived of oxygen, died with her. 2 lives extinguished by a moment that could have been undone, until it couldn't. The dog had been there the entire time. Pacing, whining, barking, trying to intervene without understanding how. He watched the pillow. He smelled panic, fear, and a familiar scent transformed into threat. He would never forget it. The mother stood over the bodies for several minutes. Not screaming, not sobbing, staring. Then she moved. Not toward help, toward cleanup. She wiped surfaces, picked up the broken piece of furniture, threw it in the trash, washed her hands in the sink until the water ran clear, unaware that diluted blood would remain in the pipes, waiting. She changed clothes, hid what she could. When the dog growled, she backed away. When he blocked her path, she waited. Eventually, she left. The door closed behind her. The house held its breath. Hours passed. The wife lay where she fell. The dog stayed beside her, guarding. And when the husband finally returned home, when shock turned to screams, when sirens returned, when investigators stepped inside, the pressure that had been building for years finally released. But not as relief, as devastation. And as detectives began peeling back the layers of what happened that afternoon, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't an accident born of rage. It was the collapse of entitlement under pressure. And the fracture had already occurred. What followed wouldn't be about whether she did it. It would be about how long she thought she could hide it. Because pressure doesn't end with violence. It multiplies. And now, it was closing in. By the time night fell, the damage was already complete. The house had been sealed, evidence tagged, the body removed. The silence that replaced the sirens felt heavier than the chaos that came before it. And yet, for the woman who had walked out of that house hours earlier, the pressure hadn't lifted. It had metastasized. Because the moment after violence is never relief, it's reckoning. And reckoning doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in through small things. Details, loose ends, blood under fingernails, a tear in a sleeve, time that doesn't account for itself. She returned to her life and attempted normalcy, clocked back into work, answered phones, sat at a desk, and pretended her hands hadn't been wrapped around a pillow only hours before. But her body knew. Her nervous system was lit up, firing constantly. Heart rate elevated, thoughts racing. The need to do something became unbearable. That's when the fractures began to show. She visited the house again. Not to grieve, to manage. The husband was barely functional, shattered, dissociated, operating on autopilot. He didn't question her presence, didn't question her help. Grief leaves little room for suspicion. But the dog did. The moment she crossed the threshold, his body changed. The same transformation, the same sound, the same instinctive positioning. He placed himself between her and the man, between her and the spaces she had violated. His reaction was so intense it couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. She explained it away. Trauma, confusion. Animals don't understand death, but animals understand threat. And the dog wasn't confused. He was remembering. Every time she moved through the house, he tracked her. Every time she touched something that belonged to the wife, he reacted. When she reached toward the husband, the dog intervened physically. This wasn't grief behavior. It was targeted defense. Investigators noticed. So did the husband. At first, he rationalized it. Blamed shock. Told himself dogs can't know things like that. But the pattern held. Day after day. Only her. Meanwhile, the investigation deepened. Phone records came back. Search history raised eyebrows. Questions typed into a browser in the hours after the fall, while the body still lay on the floor. How long can someone survive without oxygen? Can a pregnant woman survive a fall? How do police determine time of death? These weren't the searches of a grieving relative. They were the searches of someone calculating risk, trying to understand consequences, trying to stay ahead of reality. Detectives pulled financial records next. Large cash withdrawals. No explanation. No pattern consistent with normal spending. A passport pulled from storage. Movement. Preparation. Flight doesn't always mean leaving the country. Sometimes it means leaving the story. The fracture widened during a voluntary interview. She sat across from detectives, composed, polite, cooperative. Her grief presentation was appropriate. Tears at the right moments, controlled emotion, practiced sorrow. Her story, however, couldn't hold its shape. It shifted with pressure. First, she hadn't been at the house. Then she had, but briefly. Then she had argued, but left before anything happened. Each revision created new contradictions. And contradictions are cracks investigators pry open. When confronted with evidence placing her at the house for hours, her posture changed. Not collapse, but defensiveness. She minimized. It was just an argument. Then, under sustained questioning, she conceded more. She fell. That word did a lot of work. It framed the event as accidental, unintentional, tragic but blameless. But it didn't explain the asphyxiation. It didn't explain the pillow fibers. It didn't explain the cleaning. It didn't explain the blood in the sink. And it certainly didn't explain the dog. While detectives spoke to her, another team canvassed the neighborhood again. This time, they weren't asking if anyone saw something unusual. They were asking who. The neighbor across the street didn't hesitate. She remembered the car, the arrival, the length of the visit, the raised voices, the crash, and the time. She placed it squarely inside the window of death. That testimony fractured the alibi completely. When detectives returned to the interview room with this information, the shift was immediate. Color drained from her face. Her voice tightened. She stopped volunteering details, stopped making eye contact. The mask slipped, not into panic, but into calculation. And then came the dog, brought to the station not as a spectacle, but as an observation. When she walked down the hallway, his reaction exploded. Not a bark, a frenzy. He threw his body against the barriers separating them, teeth bared, nails scraping, every instinct screaming the same message. Danger. Officers had to restrain him. The sound echoed through the station. Everyone heard it, including her. She asked what was wrong with the dog. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. This wasn't evidence on its own, but it was confirmation. The fracture had become undeniable. Because trust, the thing she had relied on for decades, had collapsed. The sun no longer looked at her the same way. The detectives no longer spoke gently. The narrative she'd constructed couldn't withstand scrutiny. Control was gone. Loyalty had turned conditional. And panic, long delayed, finally surfaced. That night, she packed a bag. Not hurriedly. Methodically. Cash. Documents. Clothes. A one-way ticket purchased. Not far enough to raise immediate alarms, but far enough to disappear. She wasn't running from guilt. She was running from consequences. When officers arrived at her home early the next morning, she was ready. The suitcase was by the door. The fracture was complete. She was taken into custody without resistance. And as she was led away, the thing she had spent a lifetime avoiding finally happened. She was alone. No son. No control. No narrative left to manage. Just the weight of what she'd done. And the knowledge that the next phase wouldn't be about hiding anymore. It would be about judgment. Because fractures don't heal under pressure. They shatter. And what comes next is the moment everything becomes irreversible. The moment the handcuffs closed, the story stopped belonging to her. Up until then, everything, every explanation, every denial, every shift in tone, had been an attempt to manage perception, to control how events were framed, to keep one version of reality intact long enough for another to replace it. Arrest ends that illusion. Because once the state steps in, control becomes evidence. She was processed quietly. No spectacle, no shouting, just procedures, fingerprints, photographs, paperwork. The machinery of consequence moving forward without regard for how carefully she had curated her life. Inside the holding cell, the noise finally stopped. No phones, no explanations, no one to persuade. This is the moment most people expect remorse to arrive. But remorse requires acknowledgement. What came instead was rationalization. In the days that followed, she replayed the argument in fragments. Not the smothering, not the struggle, the words, the insult, the boundary, the moment she felt dismissed. That was the hinge in her mind. Because to admit what happened after would require admitting that control, once threatened, had turned lethal. So she didn't go there. She told herself a different story. That it was an accident that spiraled. That panic took over. That anyone could have made the same mistake. But evidence doesn't care about internal narratives. The charges were filed methodically. First-degree murder. Homicide of a viable fetus. Tampering with evidence. Obstruction of justice. Each one stripped another layer of plausibility from her version of events. The bail hearing was brief. The prosecution outlined the evidence: flight risk, financial preparation, digital searches, witness testimony. The judge listened without interruption. Bail was denied. For the first time in her life, there was no one left to intervene. Meanwhile, the house she had left behind continued to speak. Forensic teams revisited it with fresh eyes. Every surface retested. Every item reconsidered. The pillow was confirmed as the instrument of death. Fibers matched. Saliva traces recovered. Makeup smears aligned with facial injuries. The broken furniture piece told its own story. Force, direction, impact inconsistent with a simple fall. The sink drain revealed diluted blood, hers and the victim's, mixed together in a way only struggle could create. The sweater recovered from her home sealed it. Washed, rehung, but torn. The tear pattern matched the scratches documented on her arms. Microscopic skin cells remained in the seams, places water couldn't reach. It was the kind of evidence that doesn't shout. It whispers certainty. When investigators brought the sealed evidence bag containing the sweater back to the house for verification, the dog reacted instantly, even through plastic. Even days later, his response was identical to the one he had shown in her presence: rigid posture, raised fur, aggressive warning. A trauma association that hadn't faded. It had crystallized. Experts would later explain it clinically. Olfactory memory. Scent imprinting. The amygdala linking smell to threat. But in that moment, the explanation didn't matter. What mattered was that the reaction was repeatable, predictable, inescapable. The trial date was set. Public interest surged. Media coverage intensified. Headlines simplified a complex tragedy into something easier to consume. But inside the courtroom, simplicity vanished. The prosecution built its case piece by piece. Not theatrically, methodically. They didn't lead with emotion. They led with sequence, opportunity, motive, escalation, choice. They showed the jury how the boundary-setting call had preceded the visit, how the visit coincided with the window of death, how the injuries told a story of resistance, not accident. They introduced the digital searches, not as proof of intent, but proof of awareness. Awareness that something irreversible had happened. Awareness that time mattered. Awareness that survival was possible until it wasn't. The defense attempted to reclaim the accident narrative. They argued panic, fear, a tragic misunderstanding. They tried to isolate the fall from the smothering. They tried to frame the cleaning as shock, the flight as grief. But the problem with panic defenses is consistency. Panic is chaotic. This wasn't. The evidence showed sequential thinking. Cleanup, research, departure, return to work. Each step moved in one direction: avoidance. And avoidance, when it follows violence, speaks loudly. When the dog's behavior was introduced, the courtroom shifted. Not because animals are evidence, but because instinct is difficult to fake. An expert testified, not about guilt, but about memory. Trauma bonding. The way animals respond when a known individual becomes associated with threat. The defense objected. The judge allowed it, not as proof of guilt, but as corroboration. Context. And context matters. When the controlled hallway test was conducted, multiple individuals of similar appearance, one of them the defendant, the room held its breath. The dog walked calmly past each person until he reached her. Then he stopped, refused to move forward, growled, backed away. It wasn't aggression. It was refusal. The refusal to approach danger again. That moment wasn't decisive on its own, but it lingered. When the defendant took the stand against counsel's advice, she spoke about love, about sacrifice, about betrayal. She spoke about raising a son alone, about feeling replaced, about losing her place in his life. She described the fall. Stop there. When cross-examination began, the gaps became chasms. Questions she couldn't answer. Details she couldn't reconcile. Searches she couldn't explain. The pillow. The silence stretched. And in that silence, the point of no return crystallized. Not for her, but for the jury. Because intent doesn't require planning weeks in advance. Sometimes intent forms in the moment when a person decides to silence resistance rather than face consequences. That moment, when the pillow was pressed down, was the point of no return. Everything after it was just motion. The jury deliberated longer than expected, not because the evidence was weak, because the implications were heavy. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't rage. This was entitlement collapsing into violence. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Guilty. On all counts. She didn't react. No outburst. No tears. No collapse. Just a stillness that suggested the story she had been telling herself had finally run out of space. As she was led away, the son she had centered her entire life around didn't look back. That, more than the sentence, was irreversible. And yet, the story doesn't end with conviction. Because consequences ripple outward, into grief, into memory, into a house that will never feel the same, and into the life of a dog who still waits at the door, not for her return, but for something that can never come back. The echo of this crime doesn't fade. It settles, and what remains is harder to live with than guilt. Conviction doesn't feel like justice in real time. It feels procedural. Paperwork slides across desks. Court officers guide a body from one room to another. Doors open. Doors close. The machinery keeps moving, indifferent to the human weight of what it carries. When the sentence is read, the words are measured. Formal. Unemotional. A number of years. A remainder of life. The judge speaks about accountability. About harm. About a child who never drew breath and a mother who never came home. None of it changes what already happened. The woman is led away, not as a villain, not as a mother, not even as a defendant anymore, but as an inmate. Her identity collapses into a number, a uniform, a schedule that no longer bends to her will. This is the fall, not the violent one in the living room, the quiet one that follows. Inside the facility, time behaves differently. Days blur, nights stretch, silence becomes louder than conversation. There is no one left to convince, no one left to correct, no narrative to protect. Control is replaced with compliance. She is told when to eat, when to sleep, when to move, when to stop. The irony isn't lost on her, but irony offers no comfort. Letters arrive at first. Distant relatives. Old acquaintances unsure of what to say. Their words are careful, non-committal. Eventually, they stop coming. The son never writes. He doesn't visit. He doesn't call. That absence cuts deeper than the sentence ever could. Because for years, she believed her identity was irreplaceable, central, permanent. Now, she exists without context. Meanwhile, the world outside adjusts around the crater left behind. The house is sold. Not immediately. There's paperwork, probate, delays caused by grief and logistics. When it finally empties, it does so slowly. Objects are handled gently, like they might bruise. The nursery is the hardest. Yellow walls, a crib that was never used, clothes that still smell new, cards written by children who assumed life always continues. Those things don't get thrown away. They get boxed, and then they get stored somewhere no one wants to visit too often. The husband doesn't return to work right away. Grief fractures time for him as well. He sleeps on the couch, forgets to eat, starts tasks, and abandons them halfway through. People tell him he's strong. He doesn't feel strong. He feels hollow. Every room holds memory. Every silence reminds him of something unfinished. He replays the morning he left for work, the text exchange, the normalcy. He learns the hard way that grief isn't loud forever. Eventually, it becomes routine. The dog stays close, closer than before. He follows room to room, sleeps pressed against the bedroom door, startles at unfamiliar sounds, growls at unexpected visitors. Not aggressively, cautiously. Trauma doesn't fade just because justice is served. The dog still reacts to certain smells, certain tones, certain moments when a woman's voice rises too sharply or a door closes too hard. He doesn't forget, and neither does the husband. Months pass, then years. The case becomes less visible. Media attention shifts. New tragedies replace old ones. Online debates quiet. But for the people living inside the aftermath, nothing resets. The husband moves eventually, not because he wants to, but because staying feels like standing still in a place that only remembers loss. In the new house, there are fewer ghosts, but there are still echoes. He keeps one thing from the old life: the dog. They age together, slower, quieter. Sometimes, late at night, the dog stares at the door like he's listening for something. The husband wonders what he's hearing. A memory, a scent, a sound only animals can place in time. The woman in prison ages too. Not gracefully. Control doesn't translate well behind bars. Her need to manage becomes a liability. Conflicts arise. Discipline follows. Privileges are revoked. She tells anyone who will listen that she didn't mean for it to happen, that it was panic, that she loved her son. But love that requires ownership doesn't survive scrutiny. And inside a place built on consequences, explanations don't matter nearly as much as behavior. She spends long hours replaying the same moment, but never the same way. Sometimes, in her mind, the fall is enough. Sometimes, help arrives in time. Sometimes, the argument never happens at all. In none of those versions does she acknowledge the pillow. That detail remains unreachable, because acknowledging it would mean confronting the truth she's avoided since the beginning, that she chose control over consequence. And that choice cost her everything she was trying to protect. On the outside, the husband marks anniversaries quietly, not publicly, not performatively. He visits a small grave. 2 names, 1 date. He doesn't stay long. There's nothing left to say that hasn't already been said 1,000 times in silence. The dog sits beside him, always, still guarding, still loyal, still carrying a memory no amount of time has erased. The fall isn't dramatic anymore. It's permanent, a settled reality that no verdict can undo. And the question people ask, did justice happen, never has a clean answer. Because justice doesn't bring people back. It doesn't erase final moments. It doesn't quiet the mind at night when the house is dark and the memories are loud. Justice closes a case, but it doesn't close a life. What remains is residue. Grief without direction. Love without an object. Loyalty without instruction. And a truth that lingers beneath everything. The most dangerous collapses don't begin with hatred. They begin with entitlement. And once that collapses, the damage doesn't end with the fall. It spreads, and it stays. The echo of this crime is still moving outward, and it hasn't finished speaking yet. Years pass, not in the way people expect, cleanly, progressively, with lessons neatly learned, but unevenly. Some days feel untouched by time. Others feel distant, almost unreal, like they belong to someone else's life. The case is technically over. The files are closed. Evidence is cataloged and stored. Transcripts sit in archives. A conviction stands, affirmed and immovable. But endings on paper rarely align with endings in the mind. The husband learns this slowly. Grief no longer arrives as shock. It arrives as interruption. In the middle of a normal day, at the grocery store, in a passing laugh that reminds him of something he no longer has access to. He builds a new routine, not a new life, just a structure that allows him to function. He works. He sleeps. He speaks when spoken to. He avoids questions that start with "How are you doing?" because there is no answer that fits into conversation. He doesn't remarry, not because he couldn't, but because something in him resists replacement. Love doesn't reset simply because time passes. It reorganizes around absence. The dog grows older. His muzzle grays. His movements slow. His hearing dulls. But his instincts remain sharp in strange, specific ways. He still reacts to certain scents, certain presences. He still positions himself instinctively between the man and unfamiliar people who raise their voices too quickly. The vet says it's anxiety, but the man knows better. It's memory. Animals don't narrate their trauma, but they carry it. In quieter moments, the man wonders how much the dog understands. Not in language, but in impression. He wonders if the dog remembers the argument, the sound of something falling, the way a familiar presence became dangerous in a single moment. He wonders if the dog still waits for a scent that will never return. The house they live in now doesn't hold the same weight. No yellow walls, no untouched nursery, no echoes trapped in corners. And yet, sometimes at night, the man wakes to find the dog sitting upright, staring into the darkness, ears angled toward nothing audible. Listening. The woman in prison ages into obscurity. She is no longer a headline, no longer a topic. Her name appears occasionally in documents, parole reviews, procedural denials, routine assessments. She participates in programs, attends required sessions, says what is expected of her. But accountability doesn't deepen. It plateaus. She still frames the story around loss rather than action, around betrayal rather than violence, around intention rather than outcome. She talks about motherhood as if it were something that was taken from her, never as something she destroyed. In rare moments of honesty, moments no one else witnesses, there is a flicker of recognition, a quiet realization that control masquerading as love doesn't survive reality. But those moments don't stay. They retreat behind self-protection, because acknowledging the full truth would mean living with it. And some truths are heavier than confinement. The community moves on. New families occupy old houses. Children play on streets where nothing looks unusual anymore. Neighbors forget details. Stories lose precision. But trauma doesn't require collective memory to persist. It lives in the people who experienced it, and sometimes in the ones who couldn't explain it. The dog passes away years later. Quietly. At home. The man holds him as his breathing slows, as his body relaxes for the last time. There is no panic, no fear, just exhaustion and release. In the days that follow, the house feels emptier than it has in years. Not louder, not dramatic, just hollow. Because the dog had been more than a companion. He had been a witness, a protector, a living reminder that instinct sometimes sees what intellect refuses to confront. When the man buries him, he does so near two graves already marked. 3 lives connected by a moment no one could undo. The echo continues, not as noise, but as awareness, as caution, as a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it arrives wearing familiarity, history, sacrifice. Sometimes it sounds like love. And that is the most unsettling realization left behind by this story. That the warning signs were present long before the crime. They just didn't look like warnings. They looked like devotion. They looked like involvement. They looked like care that refused to loosen its grip. And when the grip was finally challenged, it didn't let go. It tightened. This case isn't remembered because of the brutality alone. It's remembered because it exposes something uncomfortable. That boundaries aren't insults. That autonomy isn't abandonment. That love without respect is unstable by design. And perhaps most disturbing of all, that the truth didn't come from a confession. It didn't come from an eyewitness statement or a single piece of forensic evidence. It emerged from pattern, from accumulation, from a dog who responded the same way every single time, without knowing why humans needed convincing. The echo of this crime doesn't ask for outrage. It asks for recognition of the moments we dismiss, the behaviors we normalize, the control we excuse because it's wrapped in sacrifice. Because by the time violence becomes visible, the damage is already complete. And the final question this story leaves behind, the one that doesn't resolve cleanly, the one that lingers long after the last word, isn't who did it. It's this. How many warnings do we ignore before we call control what it really is?